When three cruel bullies chase a new black girl through her quiet suburban neighborhood, they think she's alone, helpless, and easy to scare. But just as they close in on her driveway, two massive military dogs explode from the shadows, stopping the bullies cold with teeth bared and eyes locked. What starts as a simple walk home turns into a shocking showdown, shaking the entire neighborhood. And when a twisted video surfaces online painting her as the villain, the world turns against her overnight. But these bullies' families have secrets buried deep. Can one brave girl and her loyal dogs expose the truth before powerful enemies destroy her family for good? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Malia Bell stood in the driveway, watching the moving truck pull away. The late August heat pressed down on her like a heavy blanket, making her cotton t-shirt stick to her back. Their new house wasn't big or fancy, but its white siding and navy shutters looked neat against the backdrop of tall Georgia pines. "That's the last of them," Sergeant Leonard Bell said, setting down a box labeled kitchen on the front porch. His dark skin glistened with sweat, but his posture remained military straight despite his 67 years. "Ready to see your room, Malia?" She nodded, trying to ignore the prickling sensation of being watched. Across the street, a woman in yoga pants had stopped watering her flowers to stare at them. When Malia caught her eye, the woman gave a quick wave and hurried inside. "Yes, sir," Malia replied, grabbing a lighter box of her clothes. The wooden steps creaked under her feet as she followed her grandfather into their new home. The interior was cooler, though not by much. They'd need to get the AC running soon. Malia's footsteps echoed through empty rooms as she climbed the stairs to the second floor. Her bedroom faced the backyard with a window seat perfect for reading. She set down her box and ran her hand along the pale blue walls. "It's nice," she said, more to convince herself than anything else. Moving from their old apartment in Atlanta hadn't been her choice, but after her grandmother passed away last spring, Sergeant Bell had decided they needed a fresh start. A sharp bark from outside made Malia jump. She rushed to the window, relief flooding through her at the familiar sight of Vigor and Echo in their temporary kennel. The two German shepherds wagged their tails when they spotted her. "They're settling in just fine," her grandfather said from the doorway. "Once we get the fence checked, they can patrol the yard properly." Malia smiled at his choice of words. Even retired, her grandfather never stopped thinking like a military canine handler. "Can I let them out now? They've been cooped up all morning." "Let's meet some neighbors first," he said. "Don't want to startle anyone before proper introductions." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Malia followed her grandfather downstairs, where he opened the door to find a middle-aged white couple standing on their porch with a covered dish. "Welcome to Westford Cove," the woman said, her smile a little too wide. "I'm Susan Morganfield, and this is my husband Daniel. We're 3 houses down." She thrust forward what looked like a casserole dish. "Thought you might be hungry after moving all day." "That's mighty kind of you," Sergeant Bell said, accepting the dish with a polite nod. "I'm Leonard Bell, and this is my granddaughter, Malia." Malia noticed how Susan's eyes darted between them, lingering a beat too long. Daniel shifted his weight from foot to foot. "We, noticed you have dogs," Daniel said, gesturing toward the backyard. "Big ones?" "Yes, sir," Sergeant Bell replied evenly. "Retired military working dogs, both fully trained and certified." "Oh, military." Susan's smile wavered slightly. "How interesting. Well, just so you know, the HOA has strict rules about pets, dangerous breeds, and all that." "They're not dangerous," Malia said quickly. "They're really well trained." "I'm sure they are, sweetie." Susan cut in with a patronizing tone that made Malia's jaw clench. "We just want everyone to feel safe in the neighborhood." "Safety is my priority too," Sergeant Bell said firmly. 25 years as an Army canine handler taught me that well enough. An awkward silence followed. Malia heard distant laughter and turned to see a group of teenage boys walking past the house. They slowed down to stare, whispering among themselves before continuing on. "Those must be some of your new classmates," Susan said brightly. "Westford Cove High has a wonderful student body, very traditional values." Malia's stomach tightened at the way Susan emphasized those last words. Her grandfather must have sensed her discomfort because he straightened up even more. "Thank you for the welcome," he said. "We should get back to unpacking." After the Morganfield left, Malia helped her grandfather put away dishes and arrange furniture until the sun began to set. Finally, he nodded toward the backyard. "Go on and check on Vigor and Echo. They've been patient long enough." Malia didn't need to be told twice. She hurried outside where the evening air had cooled slightly. The backyard was decent-sized, surrounded by a wooden fence that her grandfather had already inspected twice. Vigor and Echo whined excitedly as she approached their kennel. She opened the gate and they bounded out, pressing against her legs in greeting. Despite their impressive size and training, they were gentle with her as always. "Good boys," she murmured, scratching behind their ears. Echo licked her hand while Vigor surveyed their new territory, his ears alert to every sound. More laughter drifted from the street, those boys again, passing by for the second time. Malia tensed, but Vigor and Echo's presence made her feel secure. She watched them explore the yard, their powerful bodies moving with grace and purpose. Standing there in the growing dusk, Malia felt a small measure of peace settle over her. Whatever challenges this new place might bring, she wasn't facing them alone. Malia's alarm buzzed at 6 o'clock in the morning sharp. She lay in her new bed for a moment, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of morning in suburbia, birds chirping, a car starting somewhere down the street, and the steady breathing of Vigor and Echo, who had slept in her room last night. "First day," she whispered to herself, pushing back the covers. The dogs lifted their heads, watching as she picked through moving boxes for her carefully chosen outfit. Dark jeans and a purple top that her grandmother had given her last Christmas. In the bathroom, Malia took extra time with her hair, making sure each twist was perfectly neat. Her reflection stared back at her, brown eyes serious beneath carefully shaped eyebrows. She touched the small gold necklace at her throat, another gift from her grandmother, and took a deep breath. Downstairs, she found Sergeant Bell already in the kitchen, dressed in his usual pressed khakis and polo shirt. The smell of eggs and toast filled the air. "Morning, baby girl," he said, sliding a plate in front of her as she sat down. "Ready for your first day?" Malia poked at her eggs with her fork. "I guess so." Her grandfather sat across from her, his own plate untouched. "Malia, look at me." She met his steady gaze. Even after retiring, he carried himself with the same quiet authority he'd had in uniform. "You're stronger than you know," he said. "Your grandmother saw it, and I see it too. Don't let anyone make you doubt yourself." Malia nodded, throat tight at the mention of her grandmother. "And remember," he continued, "Vigor and Echo are here if you ever feel unsafe. I've already spoken with the school. They know about our situation, and you have permission to call me immediately if anything happens." "Yes, sir," Malia said, managing a small smile. "But I don't think I'll need to. It's just school, right?" Her grandfather's expression remained serious. "Sometimes the quietest places hide the most danger. Keep your eyes open and your head high." After breakfast, Malia grabbed her backpack and gave each dog a quick pat goodbye. They whined softly as if sensing her nervousness. The walk to the bus stop took exactly 7 minutes. Malia had timed it yesterday. She stood alone at the corner, watching other students gather in small groups further down the street. No one approached her. On the bus, she found an empty seat near the middle. As more students got on, she noticed how they filled in around her, leaving the seats beside and behind her conspicuously empty. Whispers and glances followed her like shadows. Westford Cove High School was a sprawling brick building with white columns out front. Trying hard to look like something from an old movie, Malia joined the stream of students flowing through the main entrance, clutching her schedule tight. Her first class was English. She arrived early, choosing a seat near the window. As other students filed in, The whispers grew more obvious. "Did you see who moved in on Oakmont? I heard they have attack dogs. Labor. My mom says the property values are going to drop." Malia kept her eyes on her notebook, drawing small spirals in the margin. The teacher, Mrs. Howard, was a thin woman with graying hair who barely looked up as she took attendance. The morning passed in a blur of new faces and poorly hidden stares. By lunch period, Malia's shoulders ached from the tension of holding herself straight and proud, just like her grandfather had taught her. The cafeteria was a sea of circular tables, most already claimed by clearly established groups. Malia found an empty spot at the end of a table near the wall. She unpacked her lunch, another thing her grandfather had insisted on, not wanting her to have to stand in line the first day. That's when she heard them. "Well, look who it is." The voice was loud enough to carry. Malia looked up to see 3 white boys approaching her table. The one in front was tall and athletic-looking, wearing a football jersey. He had the kind of smile that wasn't really a smile at all. "I'm Cole," he announced, stopping right in front of her table. "Cole Turner, and these are my friends, Kurt and Dean." He gestured to the other 2, one stocky with a crew cut, the other lanky with a permanent sneer. Malia said nothing, focusing on her sandwich. "That's some interesting hair you've got there," Cole continued, his voice carrying across the now quieting cafeteria. "Must take a lot of work to get it to do, whatever that is." Kurt, the stocky one, snickered. "Yeah. What do you call that style anyway? Probably doesn't wash it," Dean added, pulling out his phone. "Hey, maybe we should document this for the school paper. New students' unique fashion choices." Malia felt her cheeks burn as she heard the click of Dean's camera. Around them, other students were turning to watch, some giggling, others just staring. "And that complexion," Cole went on, leaning closer. "Must be hard to find makeup that matches, huh? Do they even make your shade at the mall?" Malia's hands trembled slightly as she packed up her barely touched lunch. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her head. "Don't let them see you cry, baby. That's what they want." She stood up slowly, keeping her face carefully blank despite the hot tears threatening behind her eyes. The cafeteria had grown almost silent, watching the scene unfold. Not a single person spoke up or moved to help. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalks of Westford Cove as Malia walked home from the bus stop. The air was thick with late summer heat, making her backpack feel heavier with each step. After the incident in the cafeteria, she'd spent the rest of the school day trying to make herself invisible, keeping her head down and speaking only when called on by teachers. The suburban streets were quiet at this hour. Most people were still at work, their perfectly manicured lawns empty and still. Malia counted the houses as she passed them, a habit she'd developed to keep her mind occupied. 12 houses until home. 11, 10. A loud engine roar shattered the peace, making her jump. Malia's heart began to race as she recognized the sound, a pickup truck, the same one she'd seen Cole Turner climbing into after school. The engine revved again, closer this time, the sound echoing off the rows of identical houses. Malia kept walking, forcing herself not to run. Running would only encourage them. Her grandfather's military training had taught her that much. Never show fear to those who want to intimidate you. The truck appeared behind her, moving at a crawl. Malia could hear male voices laughing, then the squeal of tires as they gunned the engine again. She flinched despite herself. "Hey," Cole's voice called out. "New girl, don't you want a ride?" Malia kept her eyes forward. 8 houses to go. 7. "Come on," Kurt's voice joined in. "We just want to be friendly." The truck crept alongside her now. Malia could see it in her peripheral vision. A red Ford F-150, lifted high on oversized tires. Cole was behind the wheel with Kurt in the passenger seat and Dean in the back. "What's wrong?" Dean called out. "Too good to talk to us." Malia's hands tightened on her backpack straps. 6 houses, 5. The truck revved again, pulling slightly ahead of her before slowing to match her pace. Malia could smell the exhaust, feel the rumble of the engine in her chest. "Maybe she doesn't speak English," Kurt suggested, loud enough for his voice to carry clearly. "Do you understand us? Should we speak slower?" "4 houses. 3. Cole gunned the engine again, making the truck lurch forward before braking hard. Malia stumbled slightly, her heart pounding. She could see her house now, the familiar shape of it offering both relief and new anxiety. She didn't want them to know where she lived. "Look at her run away," Dean taunted. "Just like her kind always does." 2 houses. The truck surged forward once more, tires squealing against asphalt. Malia watched it speed past her house and around the corner, the sound of their laughter trailing behind it. She stood at the end of her driveway for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her house key. The front door opened before she reached it. Sergeant Bell stood in the doorway, his expression concerned. Vigor and Echo flanked him, their ears perked forward attentively. "Malia," he called out. "Everything all right?" She climbed the porch steps, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I'm fine, Grandpa." But Leonard Bell hadn't survived 3 tours overseas without learning to read people. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder as she reached the door. "No, you're not. Come inside and tell me what happened." In the kitchen, Malia sat at the table while her grandfather poured her a glass of water. The dogs settled at her feet, their warm presence comforting. "There were some boys," she finally said, staring at the glass. "In a truck. They followed me home." Leonard's face hardened, but his voice remained calm. "The same ones from school?" Malia nodded, then told him about the cafeteria incident. With each word, she could see the military bearing in her grandfather's posture becoming more pronounced. "Listen to me," he said when she finished. "You are safe here. Those boys might think they run this neighborhood, but they've never dealt with someone like me before." He reached across the table and took her hand. "If this continues, I'll speak to the school myself, and if that doesn't solve it, we'll take it higher." "I don't want to make trouble," Malia whispered. "Standing up for yourself isn't making trouble," Leonard replied firmly. "It's making a change. Your grandmother taught you that." "Oh." Malia squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his certainty. Below the table, Vigor and Echo pressed closer to her legs, as if adding their own reassurance. Malia arrived early at school the next morning, hoping to avoid any confrontations in the crowded hallways. The building was quiet, with only a few students shuffling through the corridors. She made her way to her locker, rehearsing her grandfather's words in her head. "Standing up for yourself isn't making trouble." The words died in her throat when she saw her locker. Someone had written, "Go home" across it in thick black marker. The letters were crude and angry, slashing across the beige metal. Malia's hands trembled as she tried her combination, getting it wrong twice before the lock finally clicked open. Inside, everything looked untouched. But she checked her books anyway. The familiar weight of her textbooks provided little comfort today. She grabbed what she needed for her morning classes, trying to ignore the whispers that had started behind her. "Did you see what someone did?" "Serves her right. Shh, she'll hear you." Malia slammed her locker shut harder than necessary, the bang echoing through the hallway. A few students jumped, then quickly looked away when she turned around. Their faces showed a mix of guilt and something else. Satisfaction, maybe, like they were glad someone had put her in her place. First period was English, usually her favorite subject. Today, though, she couldn't focus on the discussion of To Kill a Mockingbird. The irony wasn't lost on her as the teacher led a sanitized conversation about racism in the 1932nd, while half the class kept shooting glances at Malia, the only black student in the room. In chemistry, her lab partners suddenly forgot to share their notes from yesterday. Math class wasn't any better. When Malia raised her hand to answer a question, someone in the back muttered, "Know it all," just loud enough to be heard. The teacher acted like she hadn't heard anything. By lunchtime, Malia's stomach was in knots. The cafeteria buzzed with the usual chaos of hundreds of teenagers, but she felt like every eye was on her as she walked to an empty table in the corner. She unpacked her lunch. Her grandfather had made her favorite sandwich, but she couldn't bring herself to eat more than a few bites. Two girls from her English class walked past, giggling behind their hands. "I heard she sicked her dogs on some kids yesterday," one whispered, not bothering to keep her voice down. "They're like attack dogs or something. My mom says those kinds of dogs shouldn't be allowed in nice neighborhoods," the other replied. "They're dangerous." Malia's grip tightened on her sandwich. Vigor and Echo were the gentlest dogs she knew, unless they were protecting someone, just like her grandfather had trained them to do. She spent the rest of lunch picking at her food and trying to look absorbed in her phone. Messages from her old friends back in Atlanta filled the screen, asking how the new school was going. Malia couldn't bring herself to tell them the truth. The afternoon classes dragged by in a blur of sideways glances and whispered comments. In history, they were covering the civil rights movement, and Malia felt her face burn as the teacher talked about how far we've come, while Cole Turner smirked at her from across the room. When the final bell rang, Malia took her time packing up her books. She'd learned from yesterday. Better to wait until most students had left before heading out. She stopped by her locker, noting that someone had tried to scrub off the marker, but only managed to smear it into an even uglier stain. Finally, thinking the coast was clear, Malia pushed open the heavy front doors and stepped into the afternoon sunlight. Her heart sank immediately. Cole's red pickup was idling in the parking lot, Kurt and Dean lounging against the tailgate. They spotted her instantly. "Well, look who it is," Cole called out, his voice carrying across the nearly empty lot. "The dog whisperer herself. Bet she thinks she's better than us," Kurt added, pushing off from the truck with her fancy trained mutts. Dean pulled out his phone, probably hoping to catch another viral moment. "Maybe we should show her what we do to people who don't know their place around here." Malia's feet felt frozen to the concrete. She could turn around, go back inside, but that would mean letting them win. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her head again. "Standing up for yourself isn't making trouble." "Hey!" Cole shouted, taking a step forward. "We're talking to you, Nye." The door behind Malia swung open with a metallic creak. Mrs. Harris, her English teacher, walked out carrying a stack of papers. "Is everything all right out here?" she asked, looking between Malia and the boys with sudden concern. Cole's face shifted instantly into an innocent smile. "Yes, ma'am. We were just leaving." "Good," Mrs. Harris said firmly. "Then I suggest you do that." The three boys climbed into the truck, Cole revving the engine one last time before peeling out of the parking lot. Malia could see them laughing through the windows as they drove away. Mrs. Harris turned to Malia. "Do you need a ride home, dear?" Malia shook her head, clutching her backpack straps. "No, thank you. I'm fine." But they both knew she wasn't fine. And they both knew this wasn't over. Malia pushed her green beans around her plate, the fork scraping against the ceramic in the quiet kitchen. The overhead light cast warm shadows across the wooden table where she sat with her grandfather. Vigor and Echo lay nearby, their ears perking up at every small sound from outside. "Something's bothering you," Leonard said quietly, setting down his glass of water. It wasn't a question. After raising Malia for the past 5 years, he could read her moods like a book. Malia sighed, finally letting her fork rest. "The kids at school. It's getting worse." Leonard's face remained calm, but his jaw tightened slightly. "Tell me everything. Someone wrote 'Go home' on my locker today," Malia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And those boys, the ones from yesterday, they're always watching me, following me, making comments." "What kind of comments?" Leonard's tone was measured, careful. "Racist stuff. About me. About us living here." Malia swallowed hard. "About Vigor and Echo, too. They're spreading rumors that the dogs are dangerous, that we shouldn't be allowed to have them in the neighborhood." Leonard set his silverware down and folded his hands on the table. The overhead light caught the silver in his close-cropped hair. "Have you told any teachers?" "One of them, Mrs. Harris. She saw the boys hassling me after school today. She made them leave, but—" Malia shrugged. "It didn't feel like she really wanted to get involved. And the other teachers, they pretend not to notice." Or maybe they really don't. Malia pushed her plate away, no longer hungry. It's like everyone's waiting for us to just give up and leave. Leonard was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. You remember what I taught you about training vigor and echo? Malia nodded. Patience and persistence. That's right. Sometimes the hardest part of training isn't teaching the dog. It's outlasting their stubbornness. He reached across the table and took Malia's hand. These people, they're trying to wear us down, make us tired enough to give up. I know, Malia said. But it's hard, Grandpa. Every day it's like walking into a battle. You're stronger than they think, Leonard said firmly. Stronger than maybe you think too. He squeezed her hand. But you don't have to fight this battle alone. Malia looked up at him. What do you mean? I think we should document everything that's happening. The vandalism, the harassment, all of it. Take pictures, write it down, build our case. Leonard's military training showed in his strategic thinking. Give it a week. If things don't improve, we'll take it to the principal with evidence they can't ignore. You really think that will help? Sometimes the system works, if you know how to use it properly. Leonard smiled slightly. And if it doesn't, well, we'll figure out our next move then. Malia felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Having a plan, even a simple one, made things feel more manageable. Okay, 1 week. In the meantime, Leonard added, you keep your head high. Don't let them see you're scared. But don't do anything to provoke them either. We'll handle this the right way. Malia nodded, pushing back from the table. I'm going to start on my homework. Leave your plate, Leonard said. I'll clean up tonight. In her room, Malia tried to focus on her algebra problems, but her mind kept wandering. The dogs had followed her upstairs, and their presence was comforting. Vigor lay across her doorway while Echo settled near her desk, both alert and protective. After an hour of half-hearted studying, Malia walked to her window. The full moon hung low and bright over the suburban landscape, casting silver light across the neat lawns and identical houses. The streets were empty and quiet, peaceful in a way that felt deceptive now that she knew what lurked beneath the surface. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, watching her breath fog the window. The neighborhood had seemed so perfect when they first moved in. The kind of place where her grandfather could enjoy his retirement, where she could focus on school and maybe make new friends. Now, every shadow held potential threats. Every friendly smile masked possible hatred. The moonlight caught the chrome trim on a car parked down the street, making it flash briefly like a signal. Malia squinted, trying to make out if it was Cole's truck, but it was too dark to tell. Vigor lifted his head, sensing her unease, and came to stand beside her at the window. Malia scratched behind his ears, drawing comfort from his solid presence. We'll be okay, she whispered, more to herself than to the dog. We just have to be strong for a little while longer. Haddo. The moon continued its arc across the sky, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of Westford Cove. Malia stood at the window a while longer, watching the quiet street, trying to believe that tomorrow would be better. The final bell rang through Westford Cove High's crowded halls. Malia gathered her books slowly, waiting for most students to clear out before heading to her locker. She'd learned it was safer that way, less chance of accidental shoulder checks or whispered threats. The afternoon sun blazed through the school's glass doors as Malia stepped outside. Heat shimmered off the asphalt of the empty parking lot, and the Georgia humidity wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. She adjusted her backpack straps and started down the familiar route home. The first few blocks passed quietly. Malia walked beneath the sprawling oak trees that lined the subdivision streets, their shadows offering brief respites from the sun. She tried to focus on peaceful things, the chemistry test she'd aced that morning, the new trick she was teaching Echo, the weekend ahead with her grandfather. An engine's low rumble broke through her thoughts. Malia's shoulders tensed, but she kept walking at the same pace. The vehicle crept closer, moving barely faster than she walked. She didn't need to look back to know who it was. She recognized the distinct sound of Cole Turner's modified pickup truck. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and not just from the heat. The truck maintained its slow, stalking pace behind her as she turned onto Mason Drive. Malia's pulse quickened. This street curved sharply ahead, hidden from view of the main road by a thick cluster of trees and shrubs. The truck's engine revved suddenly, making her jump. Laughter echoed from inside the cab. "Hey, Malia!" Kurt's voice called out. "Why are you walking so fast? We just want to talk." "Well." Malia kept her eyes forward, quickening her pace slightly. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her head. "Don't run. It only encourages them." But every instinct screamed at her to flee. "What's wrong?" Dean's sneering voice joined in. "Too good to talk to us?" The truck pulled alongside her now. Malia could see Cole behind the wheel from the corner of her eye, that familiar smirk on his face as he matched her speed. "Maybe she thinks she's better than us," Cole said loudly to his friends, "living in our neighborhood, acting like she belongs here." Malia's hands clenched into fists, but she maintained her stride. 3 more blocks to home. Just 3 more blocks. The truck suddenly accelerated ahead of her, tires squealing against pavement. Malia's heart lurched as it swung around in a wide arc, cutting across both lanes to block the road ahead. The driver's side door flew open and Cole jumped out. Kurt and Dean piled out the passenger side. Malia stopped, her breath catching in her throat. The 3 boys spread out across the street, creating a wall of sneering faces and hostile postures. "Going somewhere?" Cole asked, taking a step forward. His Letterman jacket was tied around his waist, and his t-shirt was dark with sweat in the afternoon heat. Malia glanced over her shoulder. The way back was clear, but it would mean retreating from her planned route home. She'd have to circle around through unfamiliar streets. "Move!" she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart. Kurt laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the surrounding houses. "Or what? You going to call those mutts of yours?" "Yeah," Dean chimed in, phone already out and recording. "Let's see those dangerous dogs everyone's talking about." Cole took another step closer. "Your grandfather can't protect you forever. Neither can those animals." Malia began backing away slowly, keeping all 3 boys in view. The racist slurs started then, growing louder as the boys advanced. Their words were ugly, designed to wound, to remind her they saw her as less than human. She continued her careful retreat, mind racing. Her grandfather's house was behind her now, but she'd have to circle the long way around. The boys matched her pace, maintaining their threatening formation while continuing their verbal assault. "Running away?" Cole called out. "That's right. Go back where you came from." Malia's back hit something solid, a wooden fence marking someone's property line. The boys were about 20 feet away now, still advancing. She edged sideways along the fence, moving toward the intersection that would lead to her grandfather's street. "Maybe we should help her pack," Kurt suggested, cracking his knuckles. "Maybe we should," Cole agreed, his smile turning cruel. "What do you think, Malia? Want some help moving out?" Malia's breath came in short gasps now, as she continued her sideways retreat. The boys spread out wider, trying to cut off her escape routes. Dean kept his phone trained on her, probably hoping to catch her reaction for whatever edited video they planned to share later. The corner of her grandfather's street was just ahead. Malia knew if she could make it there, she'd be close to home, close to safety, close to vigor and echo. "What's wrong, Malia?" Cole called out, voice dripping with mock concern. "Don't you want to be friends? We're just trying to help you understand where you belong." Malia backed around the corner, keeping her eyes on the advancing bullies. Her grandfather's house was just a few houses down now. She could see their front yard, the American flag her grandfather insisted on flying, the well-tended flower beds they'd planted together. The boys quickened their pace, forcing her to retreat faster. Their taunts grew louder, bolder, more vicious. They knew this part of the neighborhood well, knew there were rarely any witnesses around this time of day. Malia's heel caught on an uneven section of sidewalk. She stumbled slightly, but caught herself. The momentary show of vulnerability drew hoots of laughter from her pursuers. "Careful now," Cole called out. "Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself before you get our message." She was almost to her grandfather's yard now. Just a little further. The boys closed in, their faces twisted with cruel anticipation, forcing her to back up faster toward the familiar driveway. Malia's back hit the edge of her grandfather's lawn. The boys had her cornered now, forming a tight semicircle barely 10 feet away. Their faces were flushed with excitement and cruel anticipation. Nowhere left to run. Cole taunted, taking another step forward. "Time to learn your lesson about—" Malia's fingers flew to her lips. A sharp, piercing whistle cut through the humid afternoon air. The response was instant. Two dark shapes exploded from behind the row of hydrangeas along the side of the house. Vigor and Echo moved like living shadows, their powerful bodies launching across the grass with military precision. The dogs positioned themselves perfectly between Malia and the bullies, their stance wide and protective. Their ears were pinned back, hackles raised along their spines. Deep, thunderous growls rumbled from their chests, echoing off the surrounding houses. Cole stumbled backward, all his previous bravado evaporating. His face went pale as Echo's lips pulled back, revealing rows of gleaming white teeth. Kurt dropped his phone, the device clattering across the sidewalk as he raised his trembling hands. "Oh no," Dean whispered, voice cracking. "Oh no! Oh no!" The dogs didn't advance, but their growls grew deeper. They held their ground with the disciplined restraint of their military training, muscles coiled and ready. Vigor's dark eyes tracked every tiny movement the boys made, while Echo's focused gaze never left Cole's face. Malia stood tall behind her protectors, heart still racing, but chin lifted. The tables had turned so quickly. Now it was the bullies who were backing away, fear replacing their earlier cruelty. "Call them off." Cole's voice was high and panicked. "Jesus Christ, call them off!" "They'll buy. They won't move unless you do," Malia said calmly, though her hands were shaking. "Back away slowly, and they'll stay right here." Kurt was already retreating, nearly tripping over his own feet. "Cole, man, let's go! Let's just go!" The quiet afternoon air filled with the sounds of the dogs' continued growls and the scuffling of the boys' shoes as they backed away. Dean had gone completely white, looking like he might pass out at any moment. "What's going on out here?" The shout came from across the street. Mr. Howard, their neighbor, burst out of his front door. He was red-faced and already pointing an accusing finger. "Someone call the police," he yelled, his voice carrying across the entire cul-de-sac. "This girl just set her dogs on these boys." Malia's stomach dropped. "No, that's not what—" "They attacked us." Cole found his voice again, emboldened by the adult presence. "We were just walking by and she sicked those monsters on us." Mr. Howard was already pulling out his phone. "I'm calling 911 right now. Those dangerous animals need to be contained." "They were chasing me," Malia protested, but Mr. Howard was already speaking rapidly into his phone. "Yes, emergency. There's a situation on Oakmont Lane. A black girl just set 2 aggressive dogs on some neighborhood kids. They look like attack dogs. We need police here immediately." Other neighbors were emerging now, drawn by the commotion. Malia saw phones being raised, recording the scene, but they were only capturing the aftermath, the dogs still in their protective stance, the innocent boys looking scared. "Please," Malia tried again. "They were threatening me. The dogs were just—" "Keep those animals back," Mr. Howard shouted, cutting her off. "I've already called the police. They're on their way." The bullies had backed up to the edge of the yard now. Cole's terror was already being replaced by a smug smile as he watched the adults rushing to their defense. "You heard him?" Cole called out, his voice steady again. "Better get control of your dangerous dogs before the cops show up." Malia felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Vigor and Echo remained perfectly still, waiting for her command, while the quiet suburban street erupted into chaos around them. She could hear sirens in the distance, growing closer. "Mr. Howard was still shouting into his phone. "Yes, they're still here. 2 German shepherds, clearly trained to attack. These poor boys could have been killed." Malia's hands clenched into fists as she watched the scene unfold, watched as the truth was twisted right in front of her. The dogs had protected her, had done exactly what they were supposed to do. But now, somehow, she was being painted as the aggressor. The first police car rounded the corner, lights flashing. Cole and his friends backed further away, their faces masks of false innocence as Mr. Howard waved the officers over. "Here, over here!" he called out. "These vicious dogs need to be contained before someone gets hurt." The police cruiser's red and blue lights painted the peaceful suburban street in harsh, alternating colors. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting on their belts as they surveyed the scene. Malia's heart pounded as she watched them immediately turn their attention to Mr. Howard, who was already rushing forward to meet them. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," Mr. Howard called out, pointing toward Malia and the dogs. "Those attack dogs nearly mauled these boys." "That's not true." Malia's voice cracked with desperation. "They were chasing me. They cornered me right here on my own lawn." The taller officer, his nameplate reading Morganfield, barely glanced in her direction. Instead, he focused on Cole and his friends, who had mastered looking shell-shocked and innocent. "You boys okay?" Officer Morganfield asked, his tone gentle and concerned. "We were just walking by," Cole said, his voice trembling perfectly. "And she whistled, and these huge dogs came charging at us." The second officer, Peterson, turned toward Malia's house. "Who owns these animals?" "I do." Leonard's deep voice carried across the lawn as he emerged from the front door, his movements measured and calm despite the chaos. "I am Sergeant Leonard Bell, retired Army K-9 handler. These are my trained service dogs." "Sir, you need to get those dogs under control immediately," Officer Peterson demanded, his hand shifting to rest on his weapon. Leonard's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Vigor, echo, heel." The dogs immediately responded, moving to sit at attention by his side, though their eyes remained fixed on the bullies. "Grandpa, please tell them," Malia pleaded. "Those boys were following me, threatening me. The dogs were protecting me." "Sir, we're going to need you to leash those animals," Officer Morganfield cut in, completely ignoring Malia's words. "Animal control is already en route." Leonard reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out 2 leashes. "Officers, these dogs are highly trained military animals. They responded exactly as they're supposed to when they detected a threat to my granddaughter. If you'll just listen, the only threat here was those dogs attacking innocent kids," Mr. Howard interrupted. More neighbors had gathered now, forming a loose circle around the scene. Many had their phones out, recording everything. "We need to see registration records for both animals," Officer Peterson demanded. "Of course," Leonard replied calmly. "They're inside. But first, I think we need to hear what actually happened here. Malia?" The sound of another vehicle approaching cut him off. A white van with animal control emblazoned on the side pulled up to the curb. "No," Malia whispered, her voice breaking. "No, please, they didn't do anything wrong." A uniformed animal control officer stepped out, already pulling out catch poles. "We got a report of aggressive dogs attacking minors." "These dogs didn't attack anyone," Malia shouted, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "They saved me. Why won't anyone listen?" But the officers were already moving forward, directing Leonard to hand over the leashes. Malia watched in horror as Vigor and Echo were led toward the van, their proud heads held high even now. "You can't take them!" Malia screamed, starting forward. Leonard caught her arm, holding her back gently but firmly. "Please, they're trained military dogs. They were protecting me." "Malia," Leonard said softly, his own voice tight with controlled anger. "We'll sort this out, I promise." "Sir, we need to impound these animals for public safety evaluation," the animal control officer stated flatly. "You can retrieve them after a formal hearing." Cole and his friends stood at the edge of the gathering crowd, barely concealing their smirks as they watched the dogs being loaded into the van. Kurt had retrieved his phone and was filming everything. "Officers, please." Leonard tried one more time, his military bearing evident in his straight spine and steady gaze. "I have all their documentation. These dogs have years of service records. They're highly trained and responded to a legitimate threat to my granddaughter. If you'll just—" "Sir, this is non-negotiable." Officer Morganfield cut him off. "The animals need to be evaluated after an incident like this. You can present your documentation at the hearing." "Eyes men." Malia buried her face in her grandfather's side, sobbing as she heard the van's doors slam shut. Through her tears, she could see neighbors shaking their heads, whispering among themselves. Mr. Howard stood with his arms crossed, nodding in satisfaction. "You'll be hearing from the Homeowners Association about this," he called out. "Dangerous animals like that have no place in our neighborhood." The animal control van pulled away, carrying Vigor and Echo with it. Malia felt like her heart was being torn out as she watched them disappear around the corner. Her protectors, her friends, taken away while the real threat stood free, surrounded by sympathetic adults who refused to hear the truth. The police officers were already turning away, speaking in low voices with Cole and his friends, asking if they wanted to press charges. The crowd of neighbors began to disperse, many still filming with their phones, their whispers carrying across the quiet street. Malia looked up at her grandfather through tear-filled eyes. Leonard's face was set in stone, but she could see the muscle working in his jaw, could feel the tension in his body as he held her close. They stood alone in their front yard, watching as their peaceful suburban dream crumbled around them, replaced by the harsh reality of what they were truly up against. Malia sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of untouched hot chocolate that had long since gone cold. The house felt empty without the click of dog nails on the hardwood floors, without Vigor's watchful presence or Echo's gentle head resting on her knee. Leonard paced the kitchen, his phone pressed to his ear, his normally calm voice edged with frustration. "Ma'am, these are trained military service animals, with complete documentation. They responded exactly as they were trained to do when—" He stopped listening, his free hand clenching into a fist. "No, you're not understanding. They were protecting my granddaughter from—" Malia could hear the tiny sound of the woman on the other end cutting him off again. She watched her grandfather close his eyes, taking a deep breath. "Yes, I understand protocol, but—" Another pause. "Monday. That's 4 days from now. These dogs have special dietary needs and training requirements. They can't just sit in your facility for—" He stopped again, jaw working. "Fine. Yes. I'll bring the documentation Monday morning." He ended the call and set the phone down carefully on the counter, though Malia could tell he wanted to throw it. "They won't listen?" she asked softly, already knowing the answer. "They're following procedure," Leonard replied, spitting the words out like they tasted bad. "Won't release the dogs until after a formal hearing. Won't even let me see them until Monday." Malia's phone buzzed on the table. She'd been ignoring the notifications for the past hour, but something made her look this time. Her stomach dropped. "Grandpa," she whispered, turning the phone so he could see. "Look." On her screen was a TikTok video, already gaining thousands of views. The footage, clearly shot by Kurt, showed only the moment Vigor and Echo charged forward, their teeth bared. It was edited to start right there. No sign of the boys following her, cornering her, threatening her. The caption read, "Crazy girl sets attack dogs on innocent kids in peaceful neighborhood." Leonard leaned in, his expression darkening as he read the comments flowing in. "Those dogs should be put down. This is why those people don't belong in nice neighborhoods. Bet she trained them to attack white people. Time to call the HOA and get them out." Malia's hands shook as she scrolled. The video had already been shared to local Facebook groups and community forums. Each repost added more twisted details, More hateful speculation. "They're lying," she said, her voice small. "They're making it look like—" "I know, baby girl." Leonard pulled out a chair and sat beside her, placing his strong hand over hers. "But we've got truth on our side. And I've got some calls to make." Malia's phone kept buzzing. The video was spreading faster now, reaching neighborhood watch groups and local news tip lines. A notification showed Mr. Howard had shared it to the Westford Cove Community Forum with a long post about dangerous elements threatening their children. "Look at these comments," Malia whispered, unable to stop reading despite the pain each one caused. "They're saying we should be arrested, that we planned this, that we're terrorists." "Ho!" Leonard gently took the phone from her hands and set it face down on the table. "Malia, look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his steady gaze. "What do we know about truth?" he asked, his voice carrying the same strength it had when he first taught her to work with vigor and echo. "Truth stands," she replied automatically, reciting the lesson he'd taught her so many times. "That's right. Truth stands." They can edit videos, spread lies, try to twist everything around. But truth stands. He squeezed her hand. "We're going to fight this the right way, with dignity, with evidence, and with truth." Malia nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. But she couldn't help glancing at her phone as it buzzed again. The local Nextdoor app was blowing up now, filled with posts from neighbors she'd never even met, calling her family a threat to community safety. "How?" she asked. "How do we fight when nobody wants to hear our side?" "We document everything," Leonard said firmly. "We gather evidence, we find allies, we use the system the right way." He stood up, his military bearings showing through as he straightened his spine. "I've got some old contacts from my K-9 unit days. People who know me, know my training methods. And I bet if we look hard enough, we'll find some neighbors brave enough to stand up for what's right." Malia watched as he picked up his own phone and started scrolling through contacts. It was nearly midnight now, but she could see from his expression that he didn't plan on sleeping until he'd set their defense in motion. "What about Vigor and Echo?" she asked, her voice catching. Leonard paused, his scrolling to look at her, his eyes softening. "We'll get them back. Those dogs have protected us, and now it's our turn to protect them. We're going to fight this injustice together, Malia. All of us." She nodded, sitting up straighter in her chair. On her phone, the hate continued to pour in, but her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. "Truth stands." Malia's steps echoed through the empty hallway as she arrived early, hoping to avoid the crowds. Her shoulders were tight, braced for whatever the day might bring. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she approached her locker, only to stop short. Someone had taped printed copies of the viral video screenshots all over it. Below them, in thick black marker, were the words, "Dog Girl Attacks Innocent Kids." Her hands trembled as she tore down the papers, crumpling them into balls. The sound of approaching voices made her work faster, her heart pounding. "There she is," a girl's voice carried down the hall. "The one who tried to get Cole and them killed." Malia kept her eyes down, focusing on working her locker combination. More footsteps approached, more whispers. "I heard those dogs were like trained attack weapons. My mom says they should arrest her whole family. Can't believe they let someone like that come to our school." Malia grabbed her books and slammed the locker shut, turning to find a wall of hostile faces. Some students quickly looked away. Others stared openly with disgust or fear. A few recorded her with their phones. In first period English, nobody would sit near her. Her usual desk partner had moved across the room, leaving an empty circle of seats around Malia. Even the teacher seemed uncertain, their eyes skipping over her during discussion. By lunch, the whispers had grown bolder. As Malia walked through the cafeteria carrying her tray, conversations stopped and started like waves. "Probably trained those dogs to attack white people. My dad's on the HOA board. Says they're getting eviction notices ready. Should have stayed in whatever ghetto they came from." A foot shot out, catching Malia's ankle. She stumbled, her tray clattering to the floor. Laughter erupted around her as milk soaked into her shoes. "Oops," said Jessica, one of Kurt's friends. "Guess you're not so tough without your attack dogs, huh?" Malia knelt to pick up her scattered lunch, keeping her face carefully blank even as her eyes burned. A wadded-up napkin hit her shoulder. Then another. "Hey!" A sharp voice cut through the chaos. "That's enough!" Miss Foster, the school counselor, strode through the cafeteria. The napkin throwing stopped immediately. The black woman's heels clicked purposefully on the tile as she reached Malia's side. "Anyone I catch participating in harassment will be dealing with immediate disciplinary action," she announced, her voice carrying across the now quiet room. She helped Malia up. "Come with me, sweetie. Let's get you some fresh lunch." In Miss Foster's office, Malia sat with a new tray while the counselor made a phone call. "Mr. Bell, this is Miss Foster from Westford Cove High. I think we need to have a conversation about what's happening with Malia." "Yes, I agree. Can you come in now?" 20 minutes later, Leonard arrived, still wearing his work clothes from his security job. Miss Foster closed her office door and pulled the shade. "First," she said, sitting behind her desk, "I want you both to know I've seen the full story making rounds on social media, and I don't believe it for a second. I've worked with enough students to know when something's being twisted." Malia felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Finally, an adult who would listen. "Thank you, ma'am," Leonard said. "We appreciate that. However," Miss Foster continued, folding her hands, "I need to be honest about what you're up against here. Cole Turner's father is the HOA president. Kurt Benson's mother sits on the school board. The Carter family has been here for 3 generations and practically owns half the businesses in town. So, they get away with anything," Malia said bitterly. "They're used to it," Miss Foster agreed. "But that doesn't make it right. I've seen too many families like yours get pushed out because nobody stood up to these people." She leaned forward. "I want to help. I've already started documenting the harassment I've witnessed today." Leonard nodded slowly. "We'd appreciate any support you can offer, Miss Foster. Malia's been dealing with their bullying since day one, but now with the dogs taken." "I heard about that." Miss Foster's expression darkened. "Classic move. Twist the victim into the aggressor. They'll try to use the HOA bylaws about dangerous pets to force you out. They've done it before." "Before?" Malia asked. "To the Johnsons last year. They had a rescue pit bull. One complaint about the dog looking aggressive, and suddenly they were drowning in fines and violations until they had to move." She shook her head. "But your case is different. You have military documentation for those dogs, training records, service history. We can fight this." "We intend to," Leonard said firmly. "Good." Miss Foster pulled out a notebook. "Now, Malia, I need you to tell me everything that's happened from the beginning. Every incident, every threat, every witness. We're going to document it all." Malia straightened in her chair, drawing strength from the presence of 2 adults who finally believed her. As she began to speak, Miss Foster's pen moved across the page, recording truth to stand against the lies. The evening sun cast long shadows across Oakmont Lane as Malia and Leonard walked door to door. Most neighbors peered through windows but wouldn't answer. Others opened their doors just wide enough to say, "Sorry, can't help," before quickly shutting them again. "This is useless," Malia muttered after their 10th rejection. Her feet ached, and the weight of the day's harassment sat heavy on her shoulders. "Don't lose heart," Leonard said, his voice gentle but firm. "Truth has a way of coming out." He checked his notepad. "Mrs. Pierce is next. She's usually home around this time." They approached a neat 2-story house with carefully tended flower beds. Wind chimes tinkled softly on the porch. Malia remembered seeing Mrs. Pierce tending her garden when they first moved in, offering a friendly wave. Leonard pressed the doorbell. Through the decorative glass panels, they saw movement inside. After a long pause, the door opened partially, secured by a chain. "Yes." Mrs. Pierce's dark eyes darted between them nervously. "Good evening, ma'am," Leonard said, keeping his voice low and respectful. I apologize for disturbing you. We're trying to gather evidence about what happened with my granddaughter yesterday afternoon. Mrs. Pierce glanced up and down the street. I saw something on the community Facebook page. That video doesn't show the whole truth. End of chat. That's because those boys were chasing me, Malia said, trying to keep the frustration from her voice. They had me cornered. Mrs. Pierce's expression softened as she looked at Malia. I know, she said quietly. I saw it happen. Malia's heart jumped. You did? The woman nodded, then unlatched the chain. Please, come inside quickly. They followed her into a living room filled with the scent of curry and warm spices. Family photos lined the walls, children in graduation robes, wedding celebrations, multi-generational gatherings. Sit, sit. Mrs. Pierce gestured to the couch. She perched on an armchair, hands clasped tightly in her lap. I've been feeling terrible about not speaking up yesterday when the police came. But my husband, he was worried about making trouble. We know how things work here. We understand, Leonard assured her. Many people are afraid to challenge the status quo. But this isn't right, Mrs. Pierce said firmly. Those boys, I've seen how they treat people who are different. Last year, they bullied my nephew when he visited from Mumbai, called him terrible names. She stood suddenly. Wait here. She hurried to a small table near the front door and picked up a tablet. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen. I have one of those video doorbells. It records everything that happens in front of my house. She sat between them on the couch. Look, number 1. The footage showed Malia walking past Mrs. Pierce's house, head down, moving quickly. Moments later, the 3 boys appeared, following her, their postures aggressive. The camera's microphone picked up their taunts clearly. Hey, dog girl, where you running to? This ain't your neighborhood. Maybe we should teach her a lesson. Malia flinched at their voices. Leonard's jaw tightened. The video continued, showing Malia backing away as they advanced, cornering her against the edge of her yard. Only then did the dogs appear, responding to her whistle. This proves they were the aggressors, Leonard said. May we have a copy of this footage? Mrs. Pierce nodded, but her hands trembled slightly as she worked to export the video. You won't? You won't tell them it came from me? The Turners are very influential in the HOA, and my husband's business depends on local contracts. Ein 1. Your name won't be mentioned, Leonard promised. We'll protect you like you're protecting Malia. Mrs. Pierce emailed the video file to Leonard's phone. I'm sorry I can't do more. When we first moved here 10 years ago, we faced similar problems. Not as bad, but we learned to keep quiet, to blend in. She looked at Malia. Sometimes I'm ashamed of that choice. You're helping now, Malia said softly. That means a lot. They thanked Mrs. Pierce and left through the back door at her request, cutting through her garden to reach their own yard. Once inside their kitchen, Leonard immediately forwarded the video to 2 contacts. Miss Foster will know how to use this through proper channels at school, he explained as he typed. And Pastor Green has been leading anti-racism efforts in this county for 20 years. He'll know how to bring this to light without putting Mrs. Pierce at risk. Malia watched the last rays of sunlight fade outside their window. The yard felt empty without Vigor and Echo patrolling it. But for the first time since the incident, she felt something like hope stirring in her chest. They had proof now. Real proof. The Westford Cove Community Clubhouse buzzed with angry voices as Malia and Leonard walked through its double doors. Every head turned to stare. The room was packed with people standing along the walls and clustering near the refreshment table. Malia's stomach tightened at the hostile glares. Leonard placed a steady hand on her shoulder, guiding her to 2 empty seats near the back. He carried his laptop bag, holding it close. The projector screen was already pulled down at the front of the room, ready for the HOA's usual slideshow of violations and complaints. Just remember, Leonard whispered, we have the truth on our side. Richard Turner stood at the podium, his expensive suit and carefully styled hair projecting authority. Cole sat in the front row between Kurt and Dean, all three boys wearing identical smirks. Their parents flanked them, faces set in expressions of righteous anger. "I call this emergency meeting to order," Richard announced, his voice carrying effortlessly through the room. "We're here to address a serious safety concern in our community." He clicked through several slides, showing Vigor and Echo, freeze-framed from Cole's edited video, to look as menacing as possible. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. "These dangerous animals were brought into our peaceful neighborhood without proper disclosure," Richard continued. "Last week, they were unleashed on 3 of our children." "That's not true," Malia said, her voice shaking but clear. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Young lady, you'll have your turn to speak. As I was saying, these dogs represent a clear violation of our HOA bylaws regarding dangerous breeds and aggressive animals." He gestured to a stack of papers. "I have here multiple witness statements describing the attack. We'll be voting tonight on whether to classify these animals as dangerous, requiring their permanent removal from our community." Malia felt tears burning behind her eyes. Leonard squeezed her hand. "Furthermore," Richard went on, "we'll be discussing appropriate fines for this violation, as well as the possibility of eviction proceedings if the situation isn't rectified immediately." Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Cole turned in his seat to smirk at Malia. "Now, before we move to a vote, does anyone wish to speak on this matter?" Richard's tone made it clear he expected no opposition. Leonard stood slowly, his military bearing evident in his straight spine and steady gaze. "I do." Richard's lip curled slightly. "Mr. Bell, while we appreciate your perspective, the video evidence is quite clear." "Is it?" Leonard moved toward the front of the room, laptop in hand. "Because I have some evidence of my own to share." "Oh, we've all seen the video," Richard said dismissively. "There's no need—" "Not this video," Leonard interrupted, his voice firm. He reached the podium and opened his laptop. "This is unedited security footage from yesterday afternoon, showing exactly what happened before the dogs appeared." Richard's face tightened. "This meeting agenda has already been set. According to HOA bylaws, Section 7(3), Leonard said calmly, any resident has the right to present relevant evidence at emergency meetings." He looked Richard in the eye. "You wouldn't want to violate the bylaws, would you, Mr. Turner?" A few people chuckled nervously. Richard's jaw clenched, but he stepped aside. Leonard connected his laptop to the projector. The room darkened, and the footage began to play. Malia watched the color drain from Cole's face as the video showed him and his friends following her down the street. Their cruel taunts echoed through the clubhouse speakers, making several people shift uncomfortably in their seats. "This ain't your neighborhood. Maybe we should teach her a lesson." The footage continued, crystal clear, as the boys cornered Malia against her yard. Only then did Vigor and Echo appear, responding to her whistle of distress. Complete silence fell over the room. Malia could hear her own heart pounding as the video ended. Mrs. Turner had her hand pressed to her mouth. Kurt's mother was staring at her son in horror. Dean's father looked like he might be sick. Leonard's voice cut through the silence. The dogs did exactly what they were trained to do: protect someone in danger. They never attacked. They simply stood their ground until the threat retreated. He turned to face the crowd. "Now shall we discuss who the real dangerous elements in this neighborhood are?" Richard Turner stood frozen at the podium, his carefully constructed narrative crumbling before his eyes. For the first time since Malia had seen him, he had nothing to say. The silence stretched on, heavy with shock and shame, as the truth played over and over on the screen behind them. The silence shattered as Pastor Green rose from his seat near the middle of the room. His commanding presence drew every eye as he moved deliberately toward the front. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his deep voice resonating through the clubhouse, "what we've witnessed here tonight isn't just about dogs or HOA violations. This is about something far more sinister." He turned to face the crowd, his expression grave. "For months, I've been collecting testimonies from families of color who faced similar harassment in Westford Cove. Mysterious fines, selective enforcement of rules, anonymous threats. He pulled out a thick folder. And the pattern always leads back to the same people. Richard Turner's face reddened. Now wait just a minute. No, Mr. Turner, you've done enough talking. Pastor Green's voice carried steel beneath its calm surface. Did you think nobody would notice how you've used HOA regulations to target specific families? How every family that's been forced out in the last 2 years has been either Black, Hispanic, or Asian? Phones appeared throughout the crowd, recording as Pastor Green laid out his evidence. Through the windows, Malia spotted the distinctive lights of news vans pulling into the parking lot. This isn't just about my granddaughter, Leonard added, standing beside Pastor Green. It's about every family that's been driven away by your abuse of power. A reporter from Channel 5 News slipped through the door, camera crew in tow. More followed, their presence sending ripples of tension through the room. These are baseless accusations, Richard sputtered. But his usual confidence had vanished. The HOA simply enforces our community standards. Like the standard that got the Morgan family fined for their grandmother's medical equipment in the driveway, Pastor Green countered. Or the standard that forced the Wongs to remove their traditional garden decorations while allowing identical items in other yards. The cameras swung between Richard and Pastor Green as more people stood up, finding their voices. They fined us 3 times for our Christmas lights, Mrs. Pierce called out from her seat. But our white neighbors had the exact same setup. They threatened to put a lien on our house over supposed noise violations, another resident added. But when the Turners throw late-night parties, nothing happens. Cole and his friends had lost their smirks, shrinking in their seats as the truth spilled out. Kurt's mother grabbed his arm, whispering furiously in his ear. 2 police officers appeared in the doorway, their presence sending a visible shiver through Richard Turner and the other fathers. Malia recognized them, different officers from the ones who'd taken Vigor and Echo. Mr. Turner, one officer called out, we'd like to ask you some questions about a pattern of reported harassment. Richard's face went from red to pale. He grabbed his briefcase, knocking over his water bottle in his haste. This meeting is adjourned. No further comments. Running away, Richard? Leonard asked quietly, just like your son ran when the dogs showed up. Cole's father spun around, jabbing a finger at Leonard. You haven't heard the last of this, Belle. You'll what? Pastor Green interrupted. File more false complaints? Manufacture more violations? The whole world is watching now. The news cameras captured everything as Richard Turner, face contorted with impotent rage, stormed toward the exit. Kurt's father and Dean's father hurried after him, pulling their sons along. They pushed past the reporters, ignoring shouted questions about discrimination and harassment. The officers followed them out, leaving behind a room humming with the energy of long-suppressed truths finally spoken aloud. Malia sat still in her chair, hardly daring to breathe. She watched the crowd's faces transform as realization dawned. The perfect suburban facade had cracked, revealing the rot beneath. Some looked ashamed, others relieved, but none could pretend any more that Westford Cove's problems started or ended with her dogs. Reporters swarmed around Pastor Green and Leonard, microphones extended through the windows. Malia could see more police cars pulling into the parking lot where Richard Turner and the others huddled, gesturing angrily as officers approached them with notebooks open. The mighty HOA president didn't look so powerful now. His authority was crumbling like a sandcastle at high tide. His carefully constructed world of selective rules and quiet threats was washing away in front of everyone's eyes. Mrs. Turner hurried out after her husband, her heels clicking rapidly across the floor. Cole trailed behind her, head down. No longer the swaggering bully who had cornered Malia just days ago. The last Malia saw of him, he was sliding into the back seat of his father's luxury car, looking small and scared as reporters' cameras flashed around them. As darkness settled over Westford Cove, pinpricks of light began appearing along Oakmont Lane. One by one, neighbors emerged from their homes carrying candles, flashlights, and hastily made signs. They gathered on the sidewalk in front of Malia's house, their numbers growing steadily. Malia watched from her bedroom window, hardly believing her eyes. Mrs. Pierce stood beside Miss Foster, holding a sign that read, "Bring Vigor and Echo home." The Morgan family had brought their entire extended clan, their children clutching drawings of German shepherds. Even Mr. Howard, who had called the police days earlier, stood awkwardly at the edge of the crowd, his wife nudging him forward. "Malia," Leonard called softly from her doorway. "Come see this." They stepped out onto their front porch together. The crowd fell quiet, then erupted in supportive cheers. Pastor Green stood at the center, megaphone in hand. "Tonight," he announced, his voice carrying across the gathered faces, "we stand together to say no more. No more harassment, no more discrimination, no more silence in the face of injustice." Camera crews circled the edges of the vigil, their lights casting long shadows across the lawn. Malia recognized reporters from several local stations, their microphones extended toward different speakers in the crowd. "I was afraid to speak up before, Mrs." Pierce said into one microphone, her voice trembling but determined. "We all were. But seeing what happened to Malia and her dogs, enough is enough." Leonard squeezed Malia's shoulder as more neighbors stepped forward to share their stories. Years of quiet intimidation and selective enforcement poured out into the night air. The Morgan grandfather described how the HOA had tried to fine him for speaking Spanish to his grandchildren by the community pool. A Korean-American couple detailed their battle over unapproved cultural decorations during Lunar New Year. The crowd grew larger as more residents arrived, drawn by the lights and voices. Cars slowed as they passed, some parking to join the vigil. Malia spotted several of her classmates among the faces, including some who had laughed at Cole's jokes just days ago. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the back of the crowd. People turned and parted as a police car's lights began flashing at the intersection. Officer Morgan, no relation to the family, jumped out, radio crackling. "We've got a report," he called out to Leonard. "Someone heard barking behind the Turner house. We're heading there now." Malia's heart leaped. "Vigor." Leonard was already moving. "Stay here with Pastor Green," he ordered. But Malia was right behind him, several neighbors following as they rushed toward the Turner house 3 blocks away. More police cars converged on the cul-de-sac. Officers spread out, flashlights sweeping across the manicured lawn. Malia heard it then, a familiar whimper from behind the detached garage. "There," she pointed, her voice cracking. 2 officers rounded the corner with their lights raised. "Oh my God," one gasped. Vigor lay on his side, tied to a post with rope cutting into his neck. Blood matted his fur where someone had beaten him, but his tail thumped weakly against the ground when he saw Malia. "You bastards!" Leonard's voice boomed across the yard. Richard Turner stood in his back door, Cole white-faced beside him. Kurt's father emerged from the shadows of the garage, dropping a bloody baseball bat. "He attacked me!" Kurt's father shouted. "The dog was vicious. Save it for your lawyer," Officer Morgan snapped, drawing his handcuffs. Other officers surrounded the 3 men as neighbors and news crews spilled into the yard. Malia ran to Vigor, falling to her knees beside him. He licked her hand as Leonard and a police officer carefully cut away the ropes. Animal cruelty, criminal conspiracy, hate crimes. An officer listed off as he cuffed Richard Turner. Cole started crying as another officer led him toward a squad car, all his swagger gone. "Where's Echo?" Leonard demanded, his voice dangerous. "The other dog's at my house," Kurt's father admitted quickly, wilting under Leonard's glare. "In the basement. It was Richard's idea. If we got rid of the dogs, they'd have to leave." Camera flashes lit up the night as officers shoved the 3 men into separate police cars. Richard Turner, self-appointed king of Westford Cove, slumped in the back seat as reporters shouted questions through the window. Cole caught Malia's eye just before an officer shut his door. For the first time, she saw real fear in his face. Not of dogs, but of consequences finally catching up to him. Neighbors helped Leonard lift Vigor carefully onto a blanket as animal control arrived to transport him to an emergency vet. Malia held his head in her lap, whispering that everything would be okay. Police sirens wailed through the quiet streets as the convoy of squad cars pulled away, carrying Westford Cove's fallen power brokers to face justice at last. The morning sun painted long shadows across Oakmont Lane as Malia stepped out her front door, Vigor and Echo padding faithfully beside her. Both dogs moved a bit stiffly, Vigor still healing from his injuries, Echo recovering from dehydration in Kurt's basement, but their tails wagged high as they breathed in the crisp autumn air. "Good morning, Malia," Mrs. Pierce called from her garden. She straightened up from her flower bed, pulling off her gloves. "How are the dogs doing?" "Much better," Malia replied, managing a small smile. The emergency vet had kept Vigor overnight, treating his cuts and bruises. Echo had been scared but largely unharmed. "They just need rest and regular walks." "Those monsters," Mrs. Pierce muttered, shaking her head. She crossed her lawn to scratch behind the dog's ears. "I should have spoken up sooner about what I saw." "I'm so sorry, dear." As they continued their walk, more neighbors emerged to greet them. The Morgan children ran out to hug the dogs, their parents following with fresh baked treats. Even Mr. Howard approached awkwardly, his wife nudging him forward. "I was wrong," he admitted, hands stuffed in his pockets. "What I saw that day, I made assumptions without knowing the whole story. It won't happen again." Malia nodded, not quite ready to forgive, but appreciating the effort. Leonard had taught her that change starts with acknowledgement. They passed the Turner house, now quiet and empty. Yellow police tape still marked the garage where they'd found Vigor. Malia heard snippets of conversation from other neighbors about Richard Turner's arrest, making national news. "Did you see the press conference?" one woman asked another. "The DA is charging them with hate crimes, animal cruelty, criminal conspiracy." "Good," her friend replied firmly. "And I heard the school board met in emergency session last night. All 3 boys are expelled, and they're investigating other complaints about racist bullying." Malia's phone buzzed with a text from Miss Foster. "Meeting today at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to discuss new anti-harassment policies. The whole administration will be there." Your voice matters. They turned onto the main loop of the subdivision where workers were taking down the Westford Cove Estates sign. The HOA board had resigned en masse after evidence emerged of years of discriminatory enforcement. A temporary committee of diverse residents, including Leonard, would oversee elections for new leadership. Pastor Green drove past in his car, honking and waving. He'd been instrumental in organizing community support and bringing media attention to the case. Now he was working with civil rights organizations to document similar cases of harassment in other exclusive suburbs. Malia heard a familiar voice. She turned to see Sophie Clark, a quiet girl from her history class, jogging over. "I'm really sorry about everything. Some of us are starting a student diversity club. Would you maybe want to help?" Before Malia could answer, more classmates appeared. They clustered around the dogs, asking about their recovery and sharing their own stories of witnessing Cole's bullying but being too scared to speak up. "The whole school's different now," Sophie explained. "Like people finally woke up." The principal announced mandatory sensitivity training for all students and staff. They passed the community clubhouse where a sign announced, "Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Workshop. Saturday, 10 Ampere. M. All residents welcome." Another poster advertised the weekend barbecue, "Celebrating our whole community." Leonard waited on their front porch when they circled back home. He held up his phone, showing a news alert. Local DA announces multiple felony charges in hate crime case. Richard Turner, Kurt's father, and Dean's father are all facing serious prison time, he explained. The evidence from Mrs. Pierce's camera, plus their own social media messages plotting to drive us out. It's all coming out now. Malia sat on the porch steps, both dogs laying their heads in her lap. The morning sun warmed her face as she watched neighbors walking past, waving and calling greetings. Children played freely in front yards, their laughter carrying on the breeze. The fear that had gripped the community was lifting, replaced by something new. Hope, perhaps, or simply the relief of finally being honest. "You did this," Leonard said softly, sitting beside her. "By staying strong, by not letting them break your spirit, you showed everyone what courage looks like." Malia stroked Vigor's healed neck, remembering his loyalty that day on the sidewalk. Echo pressed closer, ever protective. These streets that had once felt so hostile now rang with friendly voices. Not perfect, not yet, but changing. "We did it together," she corrected, scratching both dogs' ears as they dozed in the morning light. "All of us!" The weekend barbecue was already being set up in the park at the end of Oakmont Lane. Malia could see neighbors carrying tables, stringing lights between trees. Someone had hung a banner, "Welcome to the real Westford Cove, where everyone belongs." The first frost of winter clung to the grass on Oakmont Lane, glittering like shattered glass in the pale morning sun. Malia stood on the front porch, tugging her jacket closer around her shoulders, her breath puffing white in the cold. Vigor and Echo stretched beside her, their powerful bodies moving with a mixture of dignity and weariness. Scars still traced faint lines through Vigor's coat, reminders of a night she could not forget, while Echo's amber eyes remained sharper than ever, as if refusing to let the darkness of the basement claim any part of him. Life in Westford Cove had changed. It had been 3 months since the arrests, 3 months since the flashing red and blue lights carried Richard Turner and his allies into the shadows of justice. The neighborhood that once turned its back on her now waved when she passed. Some waves were tentative, hesitant gestures weighed down by guilt. Others were bolder, like Mrs. Pierce's proud smile when she held up a new sign in her yard that read "Justice for All." Malia adjusted her backpack and whistled softly. The dogs fell into step beside her as she walked down the familiar path toward the bus stop. Neighbors paused in their morning routines. Mr. Howard bent stiffly to pick up his newspaper, nodding at her with a face that still struggled between shame and sincerity. The Morgan twins shouted cheerful greetings before racing each other down the block. For once, she didn't feel like an outsider walking through foreign streets. She felt like she belonged. At school, things had shifted as well. The air was not magically free of cruelty. Whispers still lurked, and stares still lingered. But there was a new undercurrent, one that hummed with change. The diversity club Sophie Clark had proposed was now official, and Malia found herself sitting in its first meeting, surrounded by students who had finally gathered the courage to speak. Posters lined the walls with slogans like "No voice too small" and "Strength in truth." For weeks, Malia hesitated to talk, afraid her story had already been turned into a spectacle. But then, one afternoon, when Sophie handed her the floor, she found words spilling out she hadn't planned. She spoke of Vigor's growl that had silenced her bullies, of Echo's loyalty in the basement, of her grandfather's steady hand that refused to let fear swallow them whole. She spoke not as a victim, but as a witness to strength, hers, her family's, her community's. When she finished, the room sat in silence, and then applause rose, shaky at first, then certain. "Your voice matters," Miss Foster told her after the meeting, eyes bright. "Don't ever forget that." Malia didn't. Leonard remained the rock at the center of it all. His days were filled with community meetings, phone calls from reporters, and testimony for the ongoing trial. Yet he always found time to walk the dogs with Malia at dusk, when the streets grew quiet and the sun dipped low. On those evenings, Vigor and Echo padded proudly at their sides, living proof of resilience. Leonard's back remained straight, but there were moments when Malia caught him gazing at the flag in their yard with a softness in his eyes, as though he was weighing the battles behind him against the ones still to come. One Saturday morning, Malia accompanied him to the courthouse. The building loomed tall and cold, its stone columns gray against the winter sky. Reporters thronged the steps, their microphones like spears, their questions sharp and insistent. Malia felt the old fear prickling at her skin, but Leonard rested a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. Inside, she saw the faces of men who had haunted her nights. Richard Turner slumped at the defense table, Kurt's father staring hollow-eyed, Dean's father whispering furiously with a lawyer. They looked smaller now, diminished under the weight of consequences. When the judge entered, silence fell like a heavy curtain. Words like conspiracy, hate crime, animal cruelty echoed through the chamber, each syllable a brick in the wall of justice being built around them. Malia didn't stay for the entire hearing. She didn't need to. She knew enough to understand that truth had finally found its voice, louder than lies could ever hope to be. That night, vigor curled against her feet while she sat at her desk, scribbling into a notebook Miss Foster had given her. Document everything, her grandfather had once said. She did. Not just the pain, but the victories too. The candlelight vigil, Sophie's invitation, the Morgan family's laughter when the dogs bounded back into the park. She wrote as though weaving a tapestry, each thread proof that she was more than the cruelty aimed at her. One evening, weeks later, Pastor Green visited with a proposal. "We're building a county-wide coalition," he said, his deep voice filling their modest living room. "Families need to know they don't have to suffer in silence. We'd like you to share your story at the kickoff rally." Malia froze, the words tangling in her throat. She thought of the whispers at school, the stares, the cameras flashing outside the courthouse. She thought of Vigor's tail wagging weakly when she found him tied and beaten, and of Echo pressing close when nightmares woke her in the dark. "I can't," she whispered. "You can," Leonard said gently. "The question is, do you want to?" Malia looked at him, at the man who had carried her through grief when her grandmother died, who had built their life in Westford Cove brick by brick, who had taught her that standing tall wasn't about the absence of fear but about refusing to bend beneath it. She looked at Vigor and Echo, watching her with loyal eyes, and felt strength settle into her bones like steel. "I'll do it," she said. The rally was held in the town square beneath strings of lights that glowed against the winter sky. People gathered with candles, signs, and voices ready to be heard. When Malia stepped onto the stage, her knees shook, but she gripped the podium and began. She told them everything. Not the edited lies, not the twisted captions, but the truth. She spoke of injustice and fear, of neighbors who found their courage, of dogs who stood guard with more honor than the men who called themselves leaders. By the time she finished, the crowd was roaring. Leonard stood at the edge of the stage, his face calm but his eyes shining with pride. Pastor Green raised his arms to quiet the crowd, then pointed to Malia. "This," he thundered, "is the strength of our future." A redumped. Later, walking home beneath a sky scattered with stars, Malia felt a peace she hadn't known in months. Vigor trotted at her side, his stride steady, his wounds nearly healed. Echo pressed close, ever watchful. Leonard walked a step behind, his presence steady as the earth. The houses of Westford Cove looked different now. Not perfect, never perfect, but no longer hostile. Lights glowed in windows with warmth instead of suspicion. Neighbors waved as she passed. Somewhere inside, she felt the knot of fear that had lived in her chest begin to unravel. As they reached their yard, she paused, looking back at the street, at the quiet suburb that had once felt like a battlefield. "It feels different now," she said softly. "It is different," Leonard replied. He rested a hand on her shoulder. "Because you helped make it so." Malia bent to scratch Vigor and Echo behind their ears. The dogs leaned into her touch, their steady presence grounding her. She smiled, small at first, then wide and unafraid. The night carried the faint hum of laughter from neighbors gathered down the block, the promise of tomorrow woven into the still air. For the first time, Malia believed it. The truth had stood, and so had she. The last echoes of the Westford Cove story do not fade with the arrests or the courtroom verdicts. They linger, as lessons always do. In the quiet spaces between footsteps on a morning sidewalk, in the shadows of old fears, and in the bright flicker of candles lifted high by neighbors who finally found their voices. Malia's fight was never only about two dogs, though Vigor and Echo became symbols of the loyalty and courage we all wish we could summon in our darkest hour. Her story was about something larger, something uncomfortable and necessary. The way silence feeds injustice, and the way truth demands to be spoken, even when trembling lips must carry it. For months, she was treated as though she did not belong, mocked in classrooms, cornered in hallways, branded as dangerous because of the color of her skin and the company of two noble animals. But look closer and you'll see what truly threatened the peace of Westford Cove, not a pair of German shepherds, but the poison of prejudice, the quiet nods of neighbors who looked away, the heavy weight of rules bent by those who believed power was theirs alone to wield. And yet, even in the face of that cruelty, Malia stood tall. She learned, as her grandfather had always told her, that standing up for yourself is not making trouble. It is making change. That lesson, tested on sidewalks and in school cafeterias, echoed across the community until others began to remember it too. Mrs. Pierce, who once stayed silent, found her courage. The Morgan family shared their story. Even the children at Malia's school, once afraid to speak, raised their hands at last. One voice became many, and many voices became something unstoppable. This is the heart of the story. That justice rarely arrives in grand speeches or swift victories. It comes when ordinary people decide that silence is no longer an option, when they share the truth even if their hands shake, when they recognize that strength is not the absence of fear but the choice to move forward despite it. And what about us? We are not just observers, sitting safely behind a screen while Malia's journey plays out like fiction. Her story, though told here as a tale, reflects the struggles faced by countless real families in neighborhoods far from Westford Cove. Perhaps even in yours. Maybe you have seen the signs. A classmate singled out, a neighbor treated unfairly, a colleague carrying the weight of prejudice alone. The question is not whether these things happen, but whether we are willing to see them, to speak when it would be easier to stay silent. Because the truth is this: silence is complicity, and the opposite of complicity is not outrage, it is action. So let Malia's story stir something in you. Let it remind you that courage is contagious, that kindness is stronger than cruelty, and that every community is capable of change when people refuse to look away. I would love to hear your reflections. What did Malia's story mean to you? What lessons do you carry from it into your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments, not as casual words tossed into the void, but as part of a living conversation about justice, resilience, and belonging. And if you believe, as we do, that stories like this matter, that they can challenge, inspire, and awaken, then join our growing circle. Subscribe to Raw Black Stories so you'll never miss the next chapter. Each tale we tell is a thread, and together those threads weave into something stronger than silence, a community of voices determined to stand for truth. For in the end, Malia's story is not just hers, it is ours. And it calls to each of us with a simple, unshakable truth. The world changes only when we do,